welcome everybody to this webinar, which is the second webinar in the broader series toward Tirana 2024, the Bologna Process and developments in the European higher education area. As I said, series, you can expect more webinars to come about the Bologna Process topic, one per month. But today we focus on recognition. That is academic recognition, meaning the recognition for higher education purposes, meaning to either access or continue studies in higher education, versus professional recognition, which we will not cover today. Thanks again for joining today. Just as a quick reminder, this webinar is recorded, so once you do have finished this webinar, you will get access to the full recording of this webinar. And on top of that, you will also get access to all the presentations that will be shared over the coming hour. So also as a quick reminder about a few housekeeping rules, I just mentioned that the webinar is recorded and that you can access all the slides once this webinar has taken place. For those of you who might have missed or would like to revisit some moments of the first webinar that took place last month, you can do so by visiting again the welcome page of the CVent webinar platform and looking a little bit further down under the section First Webinar, where you can find the full recording as well as the various slides provided by my colleague Howard Davis. News as well. We have in the meantime uploaded another introductory video for you. You will see here on the left side under the section The Bologna Process, an introductory webinar that explains the Bologna Process historically and broadly, how it came into being, what the European higher education area is and what it tries to achieve. Just for your information, and surely there will be some interesting historical background knowledge in there for you. Then a final practical remark. Please note that we do have different sections for interaction. We have our speakers, of course, with us today, and you will be able to ask them some questions. When you do that, please do use the Q&A section for that, so I can pick up your questions and address them to the speakers. If, however, you have some technical issues, would just like to comment on a situation or share your experience, please use the chat for that. All right, and with this, I will continue introducing our speakers. Just very briefly, we have 3 speakers with us today who will explain to us different milestones in academic recognition. On the one hand, we have Katia Dolgova-Dreyer here from the Council of Europe. She's the head of the Higher and Further Education Unit at the Council of Europe's Education Department. This unit manages projects linked to the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which, as you probably know, is a joint convention of the Council of Europe and UNESCO. Up next, we have, after Katia, we have Vanja Gutovic from UNESCO with us. Vanja is an education specialist working at UNESCO, and there she is the secretary not only to UNESCO's Lisbon Recognition Convention, which, as I just mentioned, is a shared convention between the Council of Europe and UNESCO, but she's also specifically the secretary for the Global Recognition Convention. This Global Recognition Convention is much younger than the Lisbon Recognition Convention. It has only been in force for 10 months. So she is here to talk to us today about the Global Recognition Convention and catch us up a little bit on the progress ever since and where we are heading with the Global Recognition Convention. And finally, we have here with us today Kinga Szuly, who is head of sector for higher education policy at the European Commission Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, or in short, DG EHEA. And she is here today with us to talk about automatic recognition, which is a much discussed term lately. especially because the Commission published a few years ago a proposal for a Council recommendation on promoting automatic mutual recognition of higher education and upper secondary education diplomas and the outcomes of learning periods abroad. Apologies for the very long title. And this recommendation was adopted by the Council in 2018, and an evaluation of progress ever since has been made more recently. So Kinga will talk to us about what the European Commission is doing in the field of automatic recognition. So this is it with my introductions of the speakers. I would now very much like to welcome our first speaker. We will jump right into the topic. So as I mentioned before, we have here with us today Katrin Dolgova-Dreyer from the Council of Europe. She will explain to us a bit more of the background, the rationale, and other interesting things to note. And perhaps also we can also talk a little bit about the future of the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Just as a quick reminder for the speakers, but also for everybody here, this is really meant as an overview webinar. So if at any point you do have questions, mere understanding or have not quite gotten something, please do not refrain from really asking those questions, because I think the next hour is really a moment to ask these questions for clarification. And then we will also have a chance to discuss more technical or future gazing details after the presentations. But first, I hand over to Katrin. Thank you for being with us here today. And I hand over to you for your presentation about the Lisbon Recognition Convention.
Thank you very much, Helene, and thank you very much, participants. I will briefly make a presentation on the Lisbon Recognition Convention. So basically, what I wanted to start off, of course, you know that this convention is quite old now. I mean, young maybe for a person, but already for the convention, quite substantial, 26 years old. But let's go a little bit back to where it started from. So the next slide, please. So it started when there was, as a response to massification of higher education and increased mobility. And actually what you may have forgotten is that it actually replaced quite a high number of different conventions. In the Council of Europe, we had 4 conventions. UNESCO had 1 convention. So there were 5 different conventions on the topic. And the oldest was dating back to 1957. And that's when the idea came to join forces for the Council of Europe and UNESCO and to have a common convention. Another thing that was very new in this convention at the time is that it introduced the new concept of substantial differences, which replaced the concept of equivalence, which was really present in all the previous conventions. So that ensure fair and non-discriminatory treatment of international students and professionals. Basically, if there's no substantial differences that is found, the student's qualification should be recognized. So that is the key element of the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Next slide, please. So since many years, it's been developing, and by 2024, we arrive with a convention which has been ratified by many countries. We have 56 contracting parties. Because it's a joint convention with UNESCO, we benefit from the larger space than, for example, exists in the Council of Europe, where we have only 46 member states, because UNESCO includes more countries in its European region. So that is why, I mean, it's European, but of course it goes quite beyond Europe. As I mentioned, it's a joint convention. What's maybe surprising, it's the only convention that the Council of Europe has with UNESCO, which I mean, I find this is a pity on the one hand, and of course we enjoy really very close and excellent cooperation. The convention has by now constructed very good governance structure, solid one. There is a Lisbon Recognition Convention Committee where the representatives of the parties to the convention sit. It takes place at least once every 3 years. So next Convention Committee meeting will be in 2025, so it's not very soon, anytime now. And it also created the ENIC network, which is run jointly by the Council of Europe and UNESCO. And the European Commission also set up a NARIC network. So these both networks are very closely supporting the implementation and ensuring that there is lively exchange of information within the networks. And of course, it's at the center of the European higher education area, the Bologna Process. So it's the only legally binding instruments within the Bologna. Now, the next slide. So is it a success story? And let us, I mean, you can decide for yourself. I mean, everybody can have their own opinion. For us, when we measure the success, we measure it through monitoring. Actually, there's not been so many monitoring exercises in the convention. There's been only 2, but the second monitoring report is fairly recent. We finalized it in 2022, and we got a substantial number of replies, 53 replies from 52 contracting parties, and it covered 5 different areas. Some of them are directly in the convention. Some of them even go a little bit beyond. I invite you to read this report, which is available on the websites both of UNESCO and the Council of Europe. So what did we find? The right to appeal, we found that it's granted in all respondent countries. There are legal provisions for that. We looked at the information provision, and let us take another slide for the diagram. And there we saw that actually, I mean, for those of you with good eyesight, maybe you will be able to read the left column. I mean, with my eyesight, it's a little bit difficult, but we discovered that it's various because information on higher education systems is available online in 52 out of 53 respondents. The list of higher education institutions, 66% of countries provided both in English and in official languages. But right at the bottom, where you see that the line goes a little bit to the left, closer to the left, we noticed that only 55% of countries that responded have available information on refugees' qualifications. So it is there is still room for improvement there. Then next slide, please. We also touched on the area of automatic recognition, which strictly speaking is not part directly of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, but because of very rapid development, and Kinga will be speaking about this a little bit later on, we also thought that this is interesting to see what the situation is. We discovered that there are 31 countries that are implementing or positively replied, 6 are partially, and 11 are still to implement. But of course, there is still room for improvement there. Then the next slide, please. So what do we do from here? How do we move on? Because I mentioned the other 2 areas that were monitored. And just this morning, Vanja and myself, we had a meeting of the Lisbon Recognition Convention Bureau together with our colleagues. And basically from our side, we follow up on the recommendation of the monitoring report. We make sure that we implement them. So we took a decision to work on the topics, which are the other 2 topics that I haven't yet mentioned, and that is transnational education, where there is already an instrument, there's a code of conduct, but it will be reviewed. And also we wanted to tackle digitalization. So we will be working and preparing some a paper on digitalization, which will be presented then to the Lisbon Recognition Convention Committee for adoption. Now for the ENIC and NARIC networks. They are absolutely well-functioning networks, both of them are very vibrant, but of course there are still differences between the countries across the European higher education area. So there is room for capacity building there. The European Commission is doing a great job through NARIC calls, and at the Council of Europe, we started supporting ENIC centers that are not eligible for NARIC calls, and we are now conducting our second round of call. Then, of course, there's a need to cooperate between higher education institutions and recognition centers. And not surprisingly, there are other avenues to be explored. And in the Council of Europe, we started also thinking about the topic of automatic recognition. That is to see what are the interesting things happening and when, what can we do about this? And we set up the working group on automatic recognition. It's still very much work in progress, but we are now consulting our stakeholders. And that brings me to my final slide, because I think the presentations are timed. And my final slide is the first stakeholders that we turned to are the students, because we felt, well, we are in the end doing this all for young people, for students. And we asked them, in November, we were at the European Student Union General Assembly, myself, together with Gunnar Wacht, from head of the Estonian Eniknarik Center, and we asked the students, what is the ideal system of recognition qualification according to you? And they said that for them, it is the system which involved that universities guarantee that qualifications are recognized with minimal student engagement, where everything should happen with the minimal involvement of students. So there should be maximum output for minimum input. So with this challenging statement, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was very insightful and a very good overview of what the Lisbon Recognition Convention means, and also what the Council of Europe is doing to work further on the vision of implementing it across Europe. You mentioned before, with a question mark, whether the Lisbon Recognition Convention can be considered a success story. For me personally, it certainly is, because we cannot imagine recognition in Europe today working without the provisions of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which really foresaw fair, transparent recognition, where recognition is the default. And you only deny recognition if you can find substantial and prove substantial differences, rather than the other way around, meaning rather than the applicant having to prove that their qualifications are recognizable. So in that way, it was really a game changer and a revolution in how we approach mobility, and not just with regard to study periods, but more long-term mobility of learners across Europe. Since I don't see any questions in the Q&A section for you, I would just like to quickly follow up on what you presented thus far. So if we have a look at the Lisbon Recognition Convention, you mentioned it's young in human years, but perhaps relatively old in convention years. And there are other conventions on the way, most notably well, not on the way. We have the Global Recognition Convention, and it is open to many countries across the world, of course, and it has so far been quite popular among European countries. So with that in mind, I was wondering, where do you see the continued relevance of the Lisbon Recognition Convention in a world where we have a global convention that has, I don't want to spoiler it, but much of the same provisions as the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which is being ratified and signed by European countries? What is still the added value and relevance of the Lisbon Recognition today? And where might it have lost a little bit of this relevance because maybe there's some gaps with today's realities? What do you think about this question?
Yes, let me maybe start with the gaps. I mean, the Lisbon Recognition Convention is not new. I mean, I mentioned that it's 26 years old. So, of course, some of the provision that it contains, I mean, that there were new developments and it doesn't have them. So, for example, it says nothing about digital credentials. It does not address online learning. So now when there's a widespread use of digital credential, of course, you know, there is a need for more updates and to address the recognition of qualification obtained both online and to address digital. And that is where, I mean, we are tackling this through this additional texts that are not, I mean, because you cannot really change the wording of the convention, but you can adopt some additional texts. Now, another, of course, sort of, if you want, shortcoming and that you mentioned, is that it's a European, even if it's a European region, even if European region in terms of UNESCO includes Canada and I think Australia, but still this is, it does not have the same scope. So I think in this sense, its European character is something which is a little bit of shortcoming, and that is where we see the very important role of the Global Convention. However, to say that the Lisbon Convention is still relevant, it does put this very solid common principles to ensure that qualifications are assessed fairly and without discrimination, and fostering an inclusive and interconnected educational environment. And also, I think the strong point is this network. I mean, even if it's not directly convention, but the network of any canaric centers, which really shows how to make sure that the recognition is not only the text, but there is also a practice behind this. So I think this is something which is very strong, and where other conventions, both regional one and the global one, will still need to do more. So it has still its relevance, I think.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kathrin.
Thank you.
And we move on, and now we have heard about the Lisbon Recognition Convention, which is, of course, the most known one in our European context, since almost all EHEA countries have ratified it. But there's a new player on the ground, the Global Recognition Convention. It is much younger and only in force since 10 months, since March last year. So now is perhaps a good time to have a look at it. What is it? What does it mean, especially for European countries that have the Lisbon Recognition Convention, now the Global Convention, to deal with? And where is it heading? Where are we with the progress in ratifying this convention further and really bringing it to a global level? And to talk to us about this, I would like to invite Vanja Gutovic from UNESCO to the stage. Vanja? Yes, there she is. Hello, Vanja.
Hello, I just want to make sure you're able to see my screen.
Your screen, not yet. Maybe it takes a little while. We can see and hear you, but not yet your slides.
Julia, if you don't mind, maybe to share it instead of me.
Yes, sure, no problem.
Thank you, and sorry about that.
No problem. We're just waiting for the slides. Yes, there we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the Global Convention today. I will try to be brief. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see what we call UNESCO's global ecosystem for the recognition of qualifications. And we have 5 regional conventions, the Lisbon Convention, together with the Council of Europe, but also conventions for Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia and the Pacific, Africa, and the Arab states. And then the Global Convention. So the regional conventions, they cover everything that is recognition, mobility, and inter-university cooperation within one region, while the Global Convention really aims to facilitate this between regions. And even within the regional conventions, we have the Lisbon Convention, which is the oldest, and then the Arab Convention, which is the youngest, having only been adopted in 2022. So the Global Convention really provides a framework for all these regions to come together and cooperate. Next slide, please. As was mentioned earlier, the Global Convention is the first UN treaty in higher education with a global scope. And why is it important? Well, if we look at the mobility figures, we know that more than 235 million students are currently enrolled in higher education around the world. Of these, 6.3 million are international students. And this number has nearly tripled. It has more than doubled in the last 20 years, and it's likely to double again in the next 20 years. Out of these, 50% of the students study outside their home regions, which makes the Global Convention all the more relevant. It establishes universal principles for the recognition of studies and qualifications. It aims to ensure the fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory recognition of these, and is implemented together in complementarity with the regional recognition conventions. The convention is open to all UNESCO member states and the Holy See. Next slide, please. So as Helena mentioned, the Global Convention entered into force in March 2023. And shortly after that, the first Intergovernmental Conference of the States Parties, which is its main governing body, came together. It adopted founding documents for the operations of the Intergovernmental Conference, such as its rules of procedure, and elected a bureau. The Bureau is chaired by Norway, and the vice presidency is held by countries from different UNESCO regions. So we have Côte d'Ivoire, Estonia, Nicaragua, Japan, Tunisia, and the UK, and the Holy See as the rapporteur. In March, on the 7th of March, so just a couple of weeks from now, we will host an extraordinary session of the Intergovernmental Conference, whose purpose is to examine and adopt the work program for the Global Convention for the next biennium. And this conference is open to the states parties, of course, other UNESCO member states, and key regional and global partners. And we are hoping to send the invitations in the next couple of days. The main areas of the work program for the Global Convention include the development of operational guidelines for the convention itself, the development of a subsidiary text or a recommendation on the relationship between the Global Convention and regional conventions, research, including areas such as transnational education and the recognition of refugee qualifications, among others, capacity development and advocacy. Next slide, please. Here you can see that 27 countries have ratified the Global Convention. They are not all states parties yet, as for a country to become a state party, 3 months are required between the deposit of the instrument of ratification and the entry into force. You can see that most of or a large number of the states parties come from Europe, that is 16, and we're working through our regional offices in order to enhance regional representation among the states parties. Out of these 27, they host around 25% of the world's internationally mobile students. I hope you can see that it's not too small. Some of the countries are already major actors in the field of higher education, and we know that around 20 are in the process. Next slide, please. This is very small to see. It's a chart of which countries ratify the Global Convention and UNESCO regional conventions. But the point here really is to illustrate that most states parties to the Global Convention are already states parties to one or more of the regional recognition conventions. In the case of the European region, this is all of them. And it just goes to show the complementarity between the two. And next slide, please. The objectives of the Global Convention are similar to those of the Lisbon Convention: to facilitate mobility through international cooperation, provide an inclusive framework for fair and quality-assured recognition. The Global Convention respects domestic laws and institutional autonomy. It is not prescriptive, and it does not entail automatic recognition. Next slide, please. Just to briefly go over the main principles, the Global Convention guarantees individuals' rights to have their qualifications assessed, both for applying for studies or employment. Next, please. It aims to ensure timely and affordable assessment. And next, please. And it asks states parties to recognize the recognition of qualifications for giving access to higher education, the recognition of higher education qualifications, partial studies and prior learning, qualifications acquired through non-traditional learning modes. And this is where the Global Convention goes a step further than the regional conventions in looking explicitly at the non-traditional learning modes, of course, being a child of its time, having been adopted in 2019 when blended online and distance learning were already very predominant. It also asks states parties to recognize the qualification of refugees and displaced persons, even in cases where documentary evidence is lacking. And this is in all the regional conventions, Article 7. Now, of course, the caveat here is unless substantial differences can be shown. And the Global Convention is the first to go a step further and define what substantial differences would mean in order to provide guidance to credential evaluators. The burden of proof is on competent authorities, and individuals have the right to appeal. States parties are asked to provide information on their systems, qualifications and quality assurance mechanisms, and establish national information centers, or as they are sometimes called in UNESCO conventions, implementation structures. So the key implementation mechanisms of the Global Convention include the implementation structures or information centers, which are very well developed in the European region, networks of these structures, which is something that is yet to come, organizations for accreditation, quality assurance, qualifications frameworks, and recognition, and the Intergovernmental Conference, which is its main governing body, and the committees of the regional recognition conventions. And we will look at that on the next slide, please. You can click one more time, thank you. So the heads of the regional convention committees, they participate in the work of the Intergovernmental Conference of the States Parties. They are invited to its meetings, but more than that, they also contribute to the development and implementation of the work program, as is the case with the work program currently being developed. They're consulted on important decisions as well. And the networks of information centers, which already exist, will have a key role in the implementation of the convention as well. In terms of recognition decisions, the Global Convention is very interesting in that it says if there is provision on recognition that is more favorable in a regional convention to which a country is a state party to, then that provision shall prevail in practice. So it really builds on the regional conventions and it seeks to establish synergy with them. A regional convention does not supersede the Global Convention or the other way around, and there is no requirement to ratify one before the other. In fact, we encourage countries to ratify both at the same time. Next slide, please. Why should countries ratify the Global Convention? Well, there are several reasons, but most importantly, the Global Convention is really a tool to support learners, to facilitate their recognition and mobility across borders, and thereby also facilitate the exchange of information and research between education systems and build a more connected global higher education infrastructure. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide, and thank you very much for moving these, Julia, again. So this is just a slide with some resources that you might find useful in case you would like to know more about the Global Convention. One is on our website. It explains what the Global Convention is, its benefits, how to ratify and implement it. Second, and you can see the picture on the left-hand side, is the practical guide for recognition, which has been developed for credential evaluators. It focuses on the Global Convention, but it's equally relevant to regional conventions, including the Lisbon Convention. The resolutions of the Intergovernmental Conference are a page on the regional conventions, and of course the model instrument for ratifying the convention, which is more catered to government authorities. But the bottom line is that the Global Convention and Lisbon Convention are really more similar than different, and ratifying the Global Convention will not create new obligations for states parties to the Lisbon Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanja. Again, another interesting discussion about the benefits and synergies between the two conventions and really what the Global Recognition Convention means in terms of facilitating recognition procedures, and that it really does not replace or supersede any regional conventions, but that really the regional conventions and the Global Recognition Convention go hand in hand, especially because the Global Convention is ultimately built on the experience and also a bit the templates of the regional conventions. So nobody needs to fear any conflicting information stemming from both conventions. Do I get that right? Yes.
Yes, this is correct. Exactly.
Very good. Thank you. Well, you also already answered a lot of questions that were in my head in the past couple of months as I observed the Global Recognition Convention gaining traction with more and more countries joining in. 27 already. That's quite some progress, I have to say. And yes, a lot of European countries in the batch, which is wonderful, of course, since we see this enthusiasm for more conventions, also because the Global Recognition Convention offers some clarity with regard to substantial differences. For example, could you just, for the sake of our audience, explain what is the novelty in that regard in a bit more detail for those who are not sure?
Well, the novelty with the Global Convention is really, I think, the most importantly, it relates to the non-traditional learning mode, so that the Global Convention says that basically a degree should be treated in the same way, regardless of how it has been obtained. The definition with substantial differences, and there was a lot of discussions on this when the Global Convention was being drafted, is really to help facilitate the work of credential evaluators who are working on this every day to facilitate their understanding of what a substantial difference is and how a degree should be treated. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. No, it's because we often mention substantial differences and non-traditional learning, but sometimes there are different understandings of what these concepts actually mean. So I just wanted to make sure that we address it in case there were any uncertainties among the audience about these terms. Well, thank you so much, Vanja.
Thank you.
I would like to proceed right away with our next presentation by Kinga Szuly from the European Commission. Kinga, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Very, very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being here. So you are here with us to talk about automatic recognition because there was
me?
Yes, we can hear you. There's a little bit of a lag, but I can hear you. Okay, good. Thank you, Kinga. I will just hand over to you for your presentation about automatic recognition and what the European Commission is working on in that regard. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my slides? Does it work?
Yes, yes, we do.
Thank you very much. So I will speak about automatic recognition in the EU context. First, I just would like to remind the audience that that recognition is something that is specifically important in the EU context. It is mentioned in the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. It is a key building block of the European education area. And this is indeed something that's that's the basis of our international cooperation. As the most recent Council conclusions on further steps to make automatic recognition a reality said that when recognition is not automatic, it can entail administrative burdens for the institutions, education and training providers and learners alike, affecting equal access to equitable and quality education and training throughout life, and hampering mobility and the acquisition of transversal skills and competencies needed for personal, civic, and professional development, as well as for enhanced employability. So that is why recognition, and specifically automatic recognition, is so high on the agenda of the European Commission nowadays. So in 2018, the Council adopted a recommendation on automatic recognition. It defines what automatic recognition means, that a higher education qualification acquired in one member state is automatically recognized at the same level in any other member state for the purpose of granting access to further studies. This Council recommendation also covers not only qualifications, but also learning periods abroad. So credit mobility, not only degree mobility. It also covers secondary education, and it builds on the existing achievements in a European context. It's clear that in a European context, we already have the Bologna cooperation with several well-functioning transparency tools. We also have the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Building on all these cooperation, long-term cooperation, it is time to get rid of the substantial difference concept in a European context and move to real automatic recognition of degrees. This is the main elements what is mentioned in this Council recommendation. It needs member states to adopt their legislation. They need fully implement the EU and the Bologna transparency tools. It also needs to build more on strengthening the capacities at higher education institutions and at the National Academic Recognition Information Centers. And it's also crucial to have enough evidence on how automatic recognition works. It's important to recall and stress what is the definition of automatic recognition, what is given in this Council recommendation. So it is about considering entry to a higher education institution when we speak about automatic recognition of qualifications. It's not about admission to higher education. The higher education institutions keep the right to set evaluation and admission criteria for specific programs. It's considering for access and not for automatic admission what we speak about. Of course, it doesn't hamper the right of authorities to check the authenticity of the degree, and also to check whether the qualification in the member state where the qualification was acquired indeed gives access to higher education, because it does not mean to give more rights to students in another country than what they had in their home country. I think it's very important to note that and to avoid misunderstandings around this. After 5 years of the adoption of this Council recommendation, the Commission prepared a report to the Council on the implementation of automatic recognition. We saw that there is progress, but there is certainly a need for further work on this regard. So while the situation is indeed better, and many member states did what was required for automatic recognition. For students, actually, on the ground, it's not always the case. So here in these slides, you see some of the main findings of the implementation report, what was published in February 2022. To see what is the situation on the ground, whether the de facto situation is in line with the de jure situation in most of the countries, we prepared a short survey for higher education institutions. This is by no means representative. It is to fill the evidence gap we had on automatic recognition. This was one of the most important findings of the report, that evidence is still missing on how automatic recognition works on the ground. Nevertheless, the findings of this small survey was quite interesting. It showed that in many higher education institutions, they assess completely differently how to do recognition and how to do automatic recognition. So even higher education institutions from the same countries gave different answer when it was asked whether there is automatic recognition for a bachelor degree to access the master degree. So based on all these findings, we identified some main challenges which hampers automatic recognition on the ground. It's the lack of shared understanding of the notion of automatic recognition. When there is a confusion, sometimes at member state level, but mostly at higher education level, between recognition and admission. There are diverse decision-making processes across member states. So in most cases, it's the autonomy of the higher education institution that decide on the actual recognition of a certain degree, while recognition is in fact guided by international treaties and international agreements. So, so the legislative framework is on member state level, while the actual decision is on member state level. So without a better connection between the two levels, it's not possible to make recognition really automatic for every student. That's why the lack of systematic monitoring on recognition decision is crucial, and it's very important to ensure consistency there. When it comes to recognition of learning periods abroad, there is still room of improvement. About 84% of credit mobility is automatically recognized when it is in the Erasmus Plus context. It is still far from the 100%, what is supposed to be the case for an Erasmus Plus mobility, and we see that the situation is even less favorable in a non-Erasmus Plus context for mobility. So based on this, we identified some steps, some conclusions, what could help to achieve automatic recognition. We say that member states could consider ensuring consistency of implementation by giving the competence for automatic recognition to a dedicated body, as legislation around this is anyway on member state level, and it's about individual rights. And it would not hamper autonomy of higher education institutions to select the students who they want to admit. We would also like to see member states to systematically check through internal and external quality assurance whether the ECTS users guide for credit mobility is fully applied, and whether the recognition processes are transparent and consistent. And we definitely propose to have more systematic approach to monitor and evaluate recognition decisions and collect information on recognition decisions. How we move forward. So, of course, recognition will stay high on the agenda of the European Commission. So the European Strategy for Universities specified to develop a European quality assurance and recognition system. Currently, this is what we are working on. We are working on a proposal for a Council recommendation on a quality assurance and recognition system, linking better quality assurance and recognition to ensure that quality assurance is fit for purpose for transnational cooperation and to support the full implementation of automatic recognition throughout the EU. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kinga. Very interesting work ongoing, and I really look forward to seeing how this develops further. So regarding the topic of automatic recognition and a couple of the stumbling stones or little obstacles that you mentioned, you did, for example, bring up the issue of lingering confusions and misunderstandings regarding the concept of automatic recognition. What is actually automatic about it? So, for example, there's often a confusion between automatic recognition and automatic admission. You already mentioned that. I also wonder if trust is a little bit of an issue. We sometimes see this implied in the tendency of having regional automatic recognition first, which is often presented as a stepping stone towards a more broader scale, a more European automatic recognition. And I think this links very nicely to a very popular question in our Q&A section, which was posed by Berta Paz Lorido from the University of the Balearic Islands. So Berta writes, trust and transparency seem to be key issues when talking about recognition. Can the speakers outline a suggestion to improve this in the current competitive higher education arena? So Kinga, if you could perhaps reflect on that a little bit. And I would also like to ask our technical support to please bring the other two speakers in as well, so we can open the common discussion. Thank you. Kinga, would you have any thoughts on this question?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. So indeed, the automatic recognition wouldn't be possible in the EU without all the work that has been done in the context of the EU and in the context of the European higher education area, the Bologna Process, to develop this trust and transparency. So the standards and guidelines for quality assurance, the setting up of the European quality assurance registry and transnational cooperation of recognition authorities, quality assurance agencies. It's crucial to develop the trust for the higher education institution in Europe. Also, all the tools developed for transparency, like for example, the European qualifications framework and the national qualifications frameworks that are referenced to them, the diploma supplement and the credit transfer system. These are also an absolute necessity for automatic recognition. So we need to build on these, and we need to ensure that these works well, and all member states adopt them properly before we have automatic recognition.
Thank you very much, Kinga. I don't know, Vanja, would you perhaps like to go next and share your thoughts on this question?
Sure. So in terms of transparency, I think what the conventions, all the regional conventions in Lisbon have are the networks of information centers. And I think this is really the key for enhancing transparency and building mutual trust among education systems, because in addition to the annual meetings, the participants of the networks are, as Katia knows, in touch on a daily basis through listservs, sharing information on different qualifications, different universities. And I think this is very much a model of good practice that we have been trying to apply to other regions at UNESCO.
Thank you. Very true indeed, yes. Catherine, would you have something to add to this?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, in the Council of Europe, we take this question very seriously. We have a platform, the ETINET platform. So it's the platform for ethics, integrity, and transparency in education, where we have also countries exchanging information and developing different tools. And we are currently proposing to set up at the European level, well, Council of Europe level, the Observatory on Countering Education Fraud. So we would like to have the countries exchange the information, both in an open way, so open information, but also in a confidential way, so that we can combat fraudulent activities and also dishonest education providers, and ensure that there is trust in the qualifications that are received. So that is on our side. It's one of the really key areas at the moment that we're following. Thank you.
Yes, also an important issue. Well, thank you. And we don't have a lot of time left, and we had so many nice audience polls planned for this session. So I would like to ask my colleague in technical support if she could please launch one poll for our audience. And it's the fourth one that we had originally planned, which asks you, the audience, please vote on which topics you think will change how we deal with academic recognition in the future. And you have multiple options. You can vote for automatic recognition, as we've just heard. You can vote for university alliances and joint degrees. You can vote for the Global Recognition Convention, artificial intelligence, and micro-credentials. And if you actually have another idea and you think something else will actually be much more influential with regard to recognition in the future, please write it in the chat. So I already see responses coming in. So far, it looks like university alliances and joint degrees are the most popular answer. Indeed, they do have quite an influence, and maybe Kinga would like to briefly comment on that. No big surprise, though, that many of you think that alliances, joint degrees, double degrees, etc., will have quite an influence, hopefully a positive influence, on how we deal with academic recognition in the future, because they will hopefully allow for systems that will make recognition easier and then share the good practices outside alliances and joint degrees. Yes, I would say the absolute winner is university alliances and joint degrees, followed by, let me quickly see, automatic recognition. In the third place, there seems to be micro-credentials. Yes, we have to think about how to best recognize those, because they can take many forms, and they can also be offered not necessarily by higher education institutions, which can make it a bit tricky. And we also have the Global Recognition Convention a little bit further down, and finally followed by artificial intelligence. Now, funny that artificial intelligence is actually very low in the list, because it can both be used as a tool by those people recognizing, but it could also be used as a negative tool. For example, it poses challenge because it could help educational fraud. So interesting that it is actually ranked very lowly here. Okay, thank you. Off with this result. Before I thank you all and send you off to the rest of your day, would you have any comments on these poll results? Were there any surprises? Anybody? Yeah, Catherine, please.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm surprised by the low level of artificial intelligence, because, I mean, I must say it's going to, for me, it's going to be a revolution out there. I mean, we are really, it's developing so fast. At the council, we're trying to do something about this, but I mean, I don't know. I wonder if we'll be fast enough, because the developments are fast. So, I mean, let's see in 1 year what the result of this question will be.
Yeah, indeed. There's still much on the horizon, and hopefully in a few years we'll be any wiser. Anyway, just to add, for completeness' sake, there was also one submission in the chat about another influential development, which is, and I hope for that, better use of national qualifications frameworks and referencing to EQF, to the European Qualifications Framework. Yeah, I'm not sure if this was related to the trust and transparency, because it could also answer that question, but it would indeed be a positive development if these tools were better used. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It was a real pleasure to get a little bit of a better understanding of the history and major players and more recent developments on the recognition horizon, and to also get a little bit the audience's view and questions on major issues in the topic. Now, for me, all that is left to do is to thank our three speakers, Dolgova-Dreyer, Vanja, Gutovic, and Kinga, Szuly. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you to the audience for your questions and participation and your thoughts. And if you liked this webinar and would like to know more about the Bologna process, especially student-centered learning, you should mark in your calendar the 13th of February, because this is when the third webinar in this Bologna series happens about student-centered learning, the Bologna process perspective. This webinar is followed 1 month later by another webinar in the series about the European Quality Assurance Framework, and of course, there are more to come. Thanks for today. I hope you have a pleasant rest of the day, and I hope to see you again soon, maybe at another event, hopefully at the next webinar. Thank you so much.